In August of 1924, 56 scouts and 4 scouters from the BSA traveled to Copenhagen, Denmark to officially represent the United States in the Second World Jamboree, which was opened on August 10th by Rear Admiral Carstensen, acting as the special representative of King Christian X. 14 countries entered official scout troops in the World Scout Championships, a week-long test of scoutcraft and physical endurance. Despite heavy rains, 5,573 scouts from 46 countries and territories attended the Jamboree, which was deemed a success. One member of the BSA contingent, an Eagle Scout named Carl F. Wood from Jackson, Michigan, documented their experiences through a photo album that was recently donated to the National Scouting Museum by his son. Learn more about the BSA's participation in the Second World Jamboree in this edition of Artifact of the Week. To commemorate the 50th anniversary of the 1924 World Jamboree, a reunion was held in September 1974 in Illinois. In attendance were 23 members of the troop, 18 wives, and 1 son. As part of the reunion event, a report was published that included a chronicle of the entire Jamboree and narratives authored by individuals to record their memories of the event. In addition to the report, we have a photo album that Eagle Scout Carl Wood created. As we recall the adventures of the BSA contingent to the Second World Jamboree, we will use the photos from Carl's photo album to illustrate their story. Following the first World Jamboree in 1920, the decision was made to have a World Scouting Championship at the 1924 Jamboree. Each country would be invited to send a representative troop of 48 scouts and 4 adult troop officers to participate in the competition. The one stipulation was that the average age of the youth members had to be no greater than 16 on August 31st. Each country was also encouraged to send additional national units to the Jamboree. To select the BSA troop, councils and regions used a variety of methods ranging from rigorous competitions to selections based on evaluation of past scouting accomplishments. Finances also played a role in the process. According to the report, it was estimated that the cost per scout would be about $650. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, scouts throughout the area were engaged to help raise the necessary funding to send their representative. A Chicago newspaper underwrote the entire cost of one of the scouts, Harold Volman. Representing Memphis, Tennessee, was Eagle Scout Hammond Smith, but he was facing difficulty financing his trip. So Baron Collier, who grew up in Memphis, sponsored Smith and a second scout, Joe Dahlstrom. The Philadelphia, Mississippi Board of Trade guaranteed Cook Wilson's expenses. In Montana, the cities of Livingston, Missoula, and Helena combined to cover the expenses of their area's representative, which would be chosen based on a competition between the 3 councils. In the end, they sent 2 scouts, Bill Weber and Al White. On Saturday, July 12, 1924, 51 scouts met at the national office in New York City with James E. West and 2 of the adults attending the Jamboree with them. They were transported to a scout camp near Bear Mountain, New York, where they spent the next 11 days organizing into patrols and practicing all of the skills they would need to participate in this competition in Denmark. As part of their training, the troop witnessed a demonstration of quick camp making by the Pine Tree Patrol from Troop 1 in Stamford, Connecticut. In 3 minutes and 42.5 seconds, these 8 scouts broke their own world record in setting up a complete camp. Based on this experience, the Jamboree troop adopted the Pine Tree Patrol method, but never got as fast as the scouts from Stamford. The remaining scouts joined the troop while they were training, but possibly the most adventurous of those was Tom Fraser from Honolulu, Hawaii. Fraser missed out on all of the regular steamship sailings from the islands, and while the Honolulu Council tried to arrange passage on some other U.S. flagged ship, British Admiral Sir Frederick Field, commanding the British Special Services Fleet, offered Fraser a ride on the HMS Hood as his personal guest. Fraser accepted the offer and sailed on the Hood to Vancouver, British Columbia. Following their training time, the troop was transported back to New York City to board the Leviathan. After a large farewell dinner, the scouts received a telephone call from President Calvin Coolidge, and they heard speeches from Mortimer Schiff, James E. West, Colin Livingston, and New York Times editor John Finley. But the most memorable of all the speakers was Will Rogers. For 25 minutes, he talked to the scouts, telling them about the importance of their trip. The Leviathan sailed on the morning of July 26, with the scouts traveling in second class but receiving first class treatment. During their passage, the scouts continued with their training, with the swimmers taking over the swimming pool and the hikers walking all over the ship in full packs. Don Hawkins wrote in his diary that, at supper, the troop was not allowed to order for themselves, but had their meals planned by Dr. Cole, because some darned fool ordered porterhouse steak for breakfast. Now we eat what is prescribed. The Leviathan docked at Southampton on the evening of August 1st, and the scouts spent the next 6 days being tourists, with stops at the Tower of London, London Bridge, Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, and Westminster Abbey. The troop also attended the British Jamboree at Wembley, where they met the Prince of Wales and Sir Robert Baden-Powell. Horace Williamson wrote, "Probably my most vivid memory of the Jamboree concerns the foggy morning at Wembley, when we were inspected by Sir Robert Baden-Powell. I had expected him to be at least 8 feet tall. Instead, he was rather small, but he could make his presence felt." The two lowest points of their adventure happened next. First was the crossing of the North Sea from England to Denmark. Don Hawkins reports in his diary that all but 4 hardy individuals, including himself, crossed the North Sea by rail, suffering from terrible seasickness due to the choppy nature of the ship. The second was after they arrived in Denmark on August 9th, when the official 6 patrols of 8 boys were announced. Several diaries write of many broken hearts that day. To punctuate the disappointment, the scouts had to march 3 miles that evening, where they were housed for the night in the hold of a Polish freighter with scouts from Sweden, China, Thailand, Austria, and England. On August 10th, the troop was transported by taxi to the site of the Jamboree, arriving just 5 minutes before the entries for the World Scouting Competition were closed. There were 11 areas where the troop was judged or competed. The first was the turnout. Points were awarded for following instructions, uniform, discipline, and scout spirit. Norway won that event, and the BSA tied for 4th with Poland. The next event was Campcraft, where the troop was judged on packing and transportation equipment, quick camp making, and best camp after 3 hours. 5 teams, including the BSA, tied for first place. The third troop event was Songs and Yells. Each troop was given 15 minutes to fill with a concert of individual and in unison songs and cheers. Austria took first, with the BSA and Denmark tied for second. Next for the troop was National Folk Dances. Ralph Hubbard, the troop's assistant scoutmaster, was considered by many to be an expert in Native American dancing. Hubbard spent large segments of time at the Bear Mountain Camp as well as time on the Atlantic Crossing, teaching and rehearsing the scouts for this event. The BSA scored poorly, not because of their efforts, but because they had great difficulty in convincing the other countries that this was their national dance of the United States. The third troop event was Campfire Entertainment. The BSA tied with England, Hungary, and Switzerland for first place. And the final troop event was Camp Routine, where each troop was judged on a variety of campsite criteria such as meals, morning exercise, and camp neatness. While there's no clear record of how the BSA troop did, several other troops did much better in this category. Now it was time for the individual competitions. Up first was the Buffalo Plainsman Patrol, where Bunny Hartman took first place in first aid. Charles Berkeley Jr. never found the individual he was looking for in the observation event and finished tied for last place. Carl Wood came in second place in the deduction contest behind a scout from England. Newell Rump's twist bread came in 6th place, with one report saying he mixed up the baking soda and cream of tartar in his recipe. The metric system used in the measuring system was the downfall of the BSA Scout, and in pathfinding, the BSA Scout tied with Holland and Poland for 4th place. J.W. Thompson wrote in his diary that he was supposed to compete in both the observation and the deduction events, but wasn't told where or when to report until after both events had started. The next patrol to compete was the Pine Tree Patrol. Charles Fearson won the 80-yard dash, and Burns Ronish did well in tree climbing, but that was about it for the BSA Patrol. In the stone casting event, Henry George Stelling struggled to throw with both hands and the stone was heavier than a baseball but lighter than a shot put. Wally Root was assigned to the lassoing contest, but didn't understand why one of the Western scouts didn't take this on and earn the team more points. It turns out that none of the scouts from west of the Mississippi had ever thrown a lasso, so an accomplished pole vaulter from New Jersey was the troop's representative. Russell Bradshaw was assigned to the handyman event, but unfortunately the instructions and, quite frankly, the assignment were a mystery to him, and his low score reflected this problem. Quite possibly one of the single most disappointing situations came in the jumping or cross-country event. Gordon Gill learned that he was the scout entered into this event midway through his lunch. He was rushed to the starting line, didn't know what the event really required of him, and being halfway through lunch was in absolutely no condition to run and jump over obstacles along a 1-mile course. By the end, he was physically ill and disheartened, believing that he had let his troop down by his performance. Fortunately for the BSA, there was an alternative to these competitions, where a troop could enter a canoe trip race and the higher of the two scores would be awarded to the troops. The Beaver Patrol was responsible for the canoe trip event, with Red Gold and Dave Kiefer beating the troop from Denmark to win the event. Next up were the swimming events, with Don Hawkins being edged out for first place in the 100-meter swim. John Hosmer won the life-saving event until a BSA adult pointed out that other competitors had not used the proper technique and the event was run again. This time the BSA failed to win the contest. Tom Frazier tells the story of his event where he is diving down to retrieve an object at the bottom of the pool. He says the water was murky so he couldn't see what he was retrieving, and the judge spoke Danish, so he really couldn't ask any questions. All he knew was that he was to dive to the bottom and retrieve an object. Frazier writes, "When the contest started, the official called out America and I stepped forward to the edge of the pool. The official pointed in the direction of the object to be retrieved and I made my dive. When I got to the bottom of the pool, I groped around until I felt what seemed to be a canvas bag filled with some such subject as sand. Seizing hold of it, I surfaced and discovered that I had hold of the leg of a canvas dummy. The crowd was amused by this gauche entry into the light of day of this somewhat dull, droll representative of man. The contestants who followed me were careful not to repeat my faux pas." The competition ended with 2 patrol events. First was a 3-mile patrol obstacle race, where members of the patrol would navigate the course and demonstrate their scout skills, such as signaling and first aid along the way. The forestry patrol won the event, with a patrol from Norway coming in second. The final event of the competition was a 24-hour hike. Now, according to a November 1924 Boys Life article, this was the event that scouts wanted to win the most. Although the 50th anniversary report suggests the scouts were more focused on their individual events and really just wanted to win everything. The hike covered 25 miles and the patrol was given maps and detailed instructions on all of the activities they had to complete during the event, including returning to the start point exactly 24 hours later. 2 notable stories came at the end of this hike. The first was a stop at a bathhouse 3 to 4 miles from the end of the race. The patrol linguist, John Mans, arranged for the stop at the bathhouse with each scout to be provided a private bathtub. Now, Mans also arranged for a nice Danish girl to come and wash each scout's back and help them to dry off. Cook Wilson, another scout, claims they almost lost the race because Mans wanted to take 5 baths. The second complication at the end of the race was that each patrol would be scored on their condition when they arrived at the finish line. Now, as they approached the finish line, more and more of the scouts started to develop blisters, and walking without a limp became more challenging. About a quarter of a mile from the finish, the patrol stopped, bandaged their blisters, polished their shoes, and marched to the finish line smiling and singing. After checking in, they returned to their camp, collapsed due to fatigue, finished off their official logbook for the race, and learned that they had won the World Scout Championship, with England coming in second place, 9 points behind the boys from the BSA. On Sunday, August 17th, the Scouts marched through the rain to the closing ceremony presided over by King Christian X. This is also where the troop was presented with all of the hardware that they had earned from the World Scout Championship contests. Baden-Powell presented them with the King's Cup as the number 1 troop, along with 7 individual prizes for first aid, canoeing, hiking, the patrol obstacle race, their display, the 80-yard dash, and the best game for baseball. After the ceremony, most of the scouts were transported to the homes of the people in Copenhagen that would host the scouts until August 22nd, when they began their trip back to the United States, traveling through Germany, Holland, Belgium, and France, arriving in Paris on August 26th. The troop departed Amsterdam aboard the Lancastria and arrived in New York City on September 6th, where they attended a final banquet held at the Pennsylvania Hotel. The biggest takeaway from the 1924 Jamboree was the elimination of scouting competitions from future jamborees, as fears of the potential for nationalism to erode the true philosophy and principles of scouting was growing. Before we leave this story of the only scouts ever recognized as the World Scouting Champions, let's learn a little about Carl F. Wood, the scout that assembled the photo album we've been enjoying. Carl came to the Jamboree as a 15-year-old Eagle Scout from Jackson, Michigan. Following the Jamboree, Carl graduated from Ypsilanti State Normal College in 1933. After college, he taught high school for 4 years and became an adult leader in scouting, serving as a Scoutmaster, Cubmaster, Explorer Advisor, and District Commissioner. He worked summer at summer camps teaching the Indian lore that he had learned as part of the Jamboree troop. In 1937, he attended the National Jamboree in Washington, D.C., and following that Jamboree, Carl became a professional scouter and attended professional training at Schiff Scout Ranch. His first assignment was for 5 years as a field executive in St. Louis, Michigan. Then he spent 5 years in St. Louis, Missouri, before moving to the council in Oshkosh, Wisconsin in 1947. In 1952, Carl was named Scout Executive of the Oshkosh Council, a position he held until his unexpected death on July 31, 1959. Well, that's all the time we have for it this week. Join us next time as we continue to learn more about the history of the BSA through the collection of the National Scouting Museum and Artifact of the Week.